Thank you very much, Stephen, and the center here. I'm very honored to be here and happy to share my experiences of creating music and being part of a research team on music with you. And we will also do a little experiment later on with members of the 24 choir. So, as a professional musician performing around the world, I've been very amazed by what music can do to us, how it can shift our state of mind, our feelings, and affect us on so many levels, and also connect us together. So I was very thrilled when I was invited to join a research team at the University Hospital in Gothenburg, Sweden, about 8 years ago. And we started to, this is supposed to change here, just a moment. We wanted to investigate how we are affected by music physically. And yes, I'm glad we have an expert here. Let's start. We wanted to look how music affects us, not only in our brains. There were quite a few studies on music and the brain, but there was also we wanted to look at the autonomic nervous system and see how it affected our hearts, our breathing, look at blood samples and stuff like that. Yeah, thank you very much. And we wanted to see if we could use music in a hospital setting, because often you're very stressed, let's say before surgery. Could we use music as an intervention to bring down the stress levels? Because if you're too stressed, the treatment won't have the same effect. If we could make people relax with music and not with drugs, medical drugs you often get, then that would be a fantastic thing, right? And also to recover after surgery. See if you could come back quicker when you listen to music. But in order to do this, we want to check, yes. We did research, we did check people who were healthy, and we connected them with all kinds of measurements and recorded all the reactions in the body to see how they reacted to different music. And sometimes I would play improvising and watch all the measures and see, okay, what happens now in the lungs? What happens in the heart? Well, I changed to this key. Oh, we get this result. And we also had recorded music, and we compared the results and looked at what happens in the body. So we looked at different measurements of the body. We looked at the pulse, and there we could see the heart rate, and we could see the heart rate variations, which is a very interesting measurement, and we'll come back to that. And we looked at the breathing, and we could also the connection between breathing and the heart rate, and I will come back to that as well. We looked at fingertip temperature, which shows you about an autonomic nervous system. We looked at skin conductance, and that is something you use also in lie detectors to see sudden emotional changes. If you start to lie, you can see that there's a change in the skin conductance. But we also saw that you don't need to lie to have changes here. You can listen to music and have changes. So that was very interesting to look at. And we looked at pulse wave velocity. That's something that measures the stiffness in the arteries. And we took blood samples to see what kind of hormones and stress hormones and other hormones that were affected by the music. And of course, we also took interviews to see the correlation between what they perceived and also correlated with the body. But I won't go into detail to all the data that we collected from this. But we looked at one thing that also led to this study that Stephen was mentioning. And this is actually Stephen's heart that we're looking at here. And you see on top we have the breathing, and the bottom curve is the pulse. And as you can see, these curves go quite parallel. When you breathe in, you could actually breathe together, everybody. If you breathe in and breathe out. Breathe in and breathe out. So what happened with your hearts right now? Well, generally, all the hearts beat faster when you breathe in. And when you breathe out, they start to beat a little bit slower. So you can see here, this is Stephen's heart, breathing almost 20 beats per minute faster when he breathes in, and then 20 beats per minute slower when he breathes out. So this is interesting, and this is a known fact. But me and my fellow researcher, Björn Wickhoff, who also has a background in music, we looked at each other and said, well, if this is the case with the hearts, what would happen in a choir? Because the choir has to breathe in at the same time, and in order to sing, you have to breathe out, right? Try to sing and hold your breath at the same time. It won't work. So most choirs sing on exhaling, right? There are some songs, Inuit songs, where you can sing on inhaling. And in Sweden, actually, we sometimes talk on inhalation. I don't know if you do that in here. It would sound, how are you doing, Gösta?
No, it's quite good now.
But
Tomorrow, I don't know.
we could try this. If I ask you, and you answer by inhaling, how are you doing? Oh. What are you doing tomorrow? Oh, you're not sure, right? Okay. But most choirs sing on exhalation. And that would mean we were figuring that all the hearts would do the same kind of curve like this, that they would go up in speed at the same time and go down in speed. So I would like to invite 4 members of the 24 to do a little experiment. And while they're setting up here, I'm going to teach you a little song that we actually used in the study. And we'll just sing it together. It's very easy. The words are, just relax with my friend, just relax in my heart. So we'll just sing it together in unison. Okay. Just relax with my friends. Just relax in my heart. Beautiful. Once again. Just relax with my friends. Just relax in my heart. Beautiful. Now I will show you what happened in your hearts, and we will take a look at the hearts of the singers here. So I've connected all the 4 singers here with a little thing on the finger. So it's actually a light going through the nail, and it's detecting color changes on each finger. And these color changes measure the pulse, and from there we can see the heart rate changes. You know, when you're at the gym and measuring your pulse, you can see when it goes up, and sometimes you have 60 in pulse and then you go up to 90. And there's also small changes over a period of 10 seconds. And we'll take a look at this and what happens when we sing the song together again. And well, you can join in, everybody. Change, and everybody. Just singers here, Ella, Ben, Renata, and Sam. Thank you. So what are we looking at here? Well, let me put the curves together. Might be more easily to see here. Like this. What you can see here in the beginning, the curves were a bit different, and then here you see that the hills and valleys go very, very much together, especially with these middle curves. And let me see. Especially if we look at this. And this, the bottom curve goes, somebody has a very high pulse, it goes almost closes the roof. But you can see very clearly, especially with these two. Let me put like this. You can see very clearly that it's the pattern goes together very clearly. Yeah, that's. So this, in the end here, is when we quit singing. It's more random. But here you can see how almost everything goes together. I can take out that one. And then there's always more things that affect the heart rate. Like if you could be nervous, or you could be excited or something, and maybe too much coffee. So then the heart doesn't go down as much. But I think this is a clear synchronization. You see these hills and valleys going together at many places. Yeah. So thank you very much. A round for the applause. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. So we did this with a couple of singers in Gothenburg, and did a study on this, as Stephen mentioned, and we published it, and it was a huge interest. Usually scientific paper doesn't get read by so many, and most of them disagree with what you're stating. But this was like wonderful news, and over 100,000 have clicked on the scientific paper all over the world. Not so much in Siberia, though, but I'm not sure if maybe not so many choir singers. That lonely guy, maybe if somebody can come and sing with him one day. But in Europe, there's been a big interest. So, what does this really mean? I think it's quite beautiful to see yet another aspect of how we synchronize and how we get together when we sing. We are already coordinating our vocal cords, we're coordinating movements, we share thoughts on the lyrics, we share emotions and motivations around the song. So it's wonderful to see that even measurably in the heart you can see that there are correlations. And that is beautiful. And this is related to the breathing, actually. We could actually stand and breathe and get a similar effect. But singing is so much more fun, right? And it's a wonderful way to get us to synchronize our breathing. And I will be back on more effects of the singing. But let's focus on the breathing for a while. Because as we looked at, with the breathing, you can actually control your own heart rate and your own heart rate variability. And by controlling your heart rate variability, you can even control your own state of mind. And if you breathe slowly, you can actually calm down. This is a common use technique when you're waiting in the dentist room or giving birth. It's very effective to breathe, right? Yeah. And it's an old technique to breathe. It's apparent in yoga, mindfulness, mantras, and also in singing, because it has an effect on us. So the breathing is really a strong tool that we have accessible, very easy. But sometimes we forget it. We actually forget to breathe deeper. And it's a really good thing. So if we go back to the research project that I was, and still is a part of, we were looking for means to get people to relax. And yes, we wanted to relax with music. But if you're really stressed, and let's say you're going into surgery and a part of your body is going to be removed, it's not enough to just listen to soft music. But if you breathe, you can focus on the breathing, and the breathing itself can bring you down in your stress levels. So we worked with this and tried to find an easy way to distribute a means to relax with music and breathing. And we also saw that there were studies that showed how musically guided breathing could actually bring down hypertension and other stress-related symptoms. So we designed a musical formula with tension and release to guide the breathing to a desired pace and stimulate the heart rate variability and relaxation. And I composed special music based on this formula in different genres, and we decided the best way to distribute this music and guiding breathing was to develop an app, because everybody has a phone, even in your hospital bed. So we made an app called Music for Moods that plays this breathing guiding music and measures your pulse during the session. So it measures the pulse through the camera. You don't need any extra tools or anything. It looks at the color changes just like these things. And the app tracks your pulse through the camera and calculates your heart rate variability, which is a measure of relaxation. So you look here, this is in the beginning of the session, the heart rate is quite flat, but then in the end it's going like this, just as with most of the singers today. And you can go back and see how did I do last week or the week before, and get measures. You can really learn by the biofeedback, learn how you can relax and find ways to go back into relaxations when you're too stressed. And we also created a research version of this app that would transmit data directly to a server. And so we could do trials. We went to Volvo in Gothenburg and asked, are there stressed people here that want to be part of it? And in half an hour the whole study was full of people. So, and it worked really well. We're still working on the results. But, and you can also download this app if you want. It's called Music for Moods, available on App Store and the Google Play. And future versions might include that that music adapts to your heart rate. It feels where you are and gives you the perfect right music to relax. And it would also be great to add a sing-along version, so we can sing together. So we started at Volvo, and it's also the app is also evaluated in several countries in Europe, Netherlands and Belgium. And the next exciting project we are planning for is broken heart syndrome. Have you heard about broken heart syndrome? Yes, some of you have. Well, it has been in songs for hundreds of years that you feel like your heart is broken when somebody left you, right? And but 10 or 15 years ago, they discovered that there is a clinical equivalence to this. There's actually a syndrome that's now called broken heart. The symptoms are almost like a heart attack, but it's not a heart attack. And then they started to ask the people that came in with this syndrome, how are you doing? And they started to tell stories like, well, my son died yesterday, or yesterday I found a note from my husband and he said he'd never come back. Things like that, very stressful. And that would break your heart, of course. And things like that was happening with this syndrome. So it's actually released by a very strong stress, emotional stress, and it's almost only that get this. So the doctors who work with this in Gothenburg, they asked me, can we do something with music and perhaps breathing, and see if we can support the self-healing process for these patients? And I like to put it can we mend broken hearts with music? So that's very interesting, and I hope to that we'll have success with this. But let's go back to the choir singing. We've been focusing on the breathing, and there's so much research in all of the world, and definitely at the Sydney and Hahn Center, but I've also been meeting people in Australia, in America, who does a lot of fantastic research on choir and how the singing benefits us. And I'll just mention a few samples. It stimulates the oxytocin production, which is a well-being hormone. And you can get it when you're breastfeeding or hugging, but you can also sing to raise your production of oxytocin, which is a good thing. An Oxford study showed that it's the best icebreaker of social activities. It even has a stronger well-being effect in sports and solo singing. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It can offer pain relief, and Stephen will tell you more about all the fantastic things they're doing with different symptoms and choirs with Parkinson's, stroke, and well, military wives is not a symptom, but as I understand it, they use choirs on foreign military bases where there sometimes is very strict relations between like the corporal wives and the colonel wife, and they're not allowed to address each other, just relaxed way. But when they sing in a choir together, all these things are resolved, and they can feel much more as a team. And a study in 2016 by Daisy Fancourt and fellows looked at choir singing with cancer patients and could see actually an effect on the immune system. And they believe that it could possibly slow down the course of cancer, which is fantastic. And I was in Australia and saw several choirs with stroke recovery, and I think you have some stroke choirs here too. And they were witnessing about how people were starting to recover their speech after being part of the singing. How are we doing on time, Stephen? Yeah. We could actually bring in, if there are some questions about this. I've been telling you a lot of stories. Yeah, Robert?
I'm interested in the pain, helping you cope with pain, simply because the... You've got a mic to go around. Super loud. I was just interested in the pain relief, being able to cope with more pain, simply because it came up in the swearing last night. There was an experiment with a bucket of ice water and swearing, and see how long you could cope with your hand in it, with about 70 patients trying that out. And I also saw it on one of my daughters, Dr. Zan, what's that wonderful kids program with two doctors where they do this thing, and he was trying to do it without obviously swearing because it was a children's program. And I just wondered whether medically there was any connection between what happens when you swear and when you sing. What is it that is actually happening physically at that moment?
So did it help to swear for those?
Massively, yes.
Yeah, I mean it's a way of expressing your feelings, I guess, right?
I don't know, I haven't got far enough in it, but it is a serious scientific study. And so I'm just interested, what happens when you sing? Yeah. What is happening that allows you?
I think that test that you've just described is very widely used in experimental studies to look at experiences of pain and what might make a difference to people's experiences of pain. And another one is rather similar to having your blood pressure checked. If you know, I'm sure all of us have had a cuff which inflates and there's increased pressure on the arm, and it gets to a certain point and then it deflates. Well, there's a device for producing pain where the pressure just increases, and until the point at which you say, no, stop, I can't tolerate any more. So interestingly, that was a technique used by Robin Dunbar at the University of Oxford, which Rickard referred to. And they did find that when people were engaged in musical activity, including singing, it did seem to raise the threshold of tolerance for pain. And they attribute that to a release of central endorphins, which have a kind of pain-relieving function. So there is possibly a physiological basis to it, but there's also, as you said, the kind of expression, although that wasn't happening while the pain was being experienced, it was something that happened as a consequence of engaging with musical activity. So there are different ways of doing these studies, and the devil is in the detail of it, in a way. I think with pain relief and singing, where people suffer from chronic pain, I think that the mechanism of distraction is important, and the mechanism of relaxation is important. So they would be two things which are partly psychological, partly physiological, that are probably brought into play when people sing together. And I think that really accounts for that finding. Yes, let's have some further questions or comments. Helena, thank you.
I was interested in how you've made the compositional decisions for the music that you've composed specifically for the app. So, of course, your paper looks very much at structures and breathing together, and that being the main factor you've looked at so far in terms of heart rate variability. But of course, music has so much more than just its structure. And as you pointed out, looking at different key changes, etc. So, how have you decided how to compose the music based on the general population? Just curious.
Yeah, I would say that there's not a general chord or melody that's this is the healthy chord or healthy intervals of things like that. But what we looked at was the structure of the phrases, and we looked at the 10-second cycles of breathing, which has an impact on the heart. You're talking about 0.1 hertz, and then that's the biggest heart rate variability often. So then I worked with 10 seconds structures and tension and release that would guide the breathing. And but there's no, people ask me, well, isn't jazz harmful, or isn't heavy metal must be bad for you? But we didn't see things like that or certain structures, but we work with tension and release to compose the music.
And if you had a sing-along version, presumably that would become more important. So if somebody's singing outside of their comfortable range, for instance, those sorts of things might have a conflicting effect potentially.
Yeah, you have to put all these things into the context. I mean, it has to feel good to sing it and be easily and maybe be familiar. And also in the app, we didn't bring in text because that would stress the mind. More instrumental and just listening. Yeah.
I think you said to me before, Rickard, that the 10-second cycle is quite commonly found in commonly sung hymns in church.
Yeah, that's interesting. When you start to look at it, even in the Rosario prayer, was a study by Bernardi who looked at the Rosario prayer is often like 10 seconds, and many chants and mantras like Tessie songs, you find this 10 seconds cycle, which is good for your heart rate. And so it's interesting that this perhaps intuitively has been found even before all these studies.
I know there are other people that want to. The lady over there, I think, had her hand up first.
Thank you very much. I was interested to know if any comparison has been carried out between the general population, if you like, and people who work in music, professional musicians, if the same results are as pronounced, because I don't know about anybody else, but I teach music all day in school. I sing all day, and when I get home to relax, I really want some quiet. So I wondered if that comparison had been made, or...
Yeah, I think there was a Swedish study with Töres Theorell, and you could see that amateurs had more, I think they got more out of the singing lessons and more relaxation than the professional singers, because when you're professional, you start to add all the, you want to do good and you want to be, you're not as relaxed about it as when you're just doing it for fun. So yeah, I hate listening to music sometimes when I've been working with it all day. It's like silent. So yeah. I also like to add a comment on the phrasing. Slow hymns are very good for this cycles. I mean, people have been singing hymns for a long time, and when I was young we were singing that in school, and I think that's probably a good start to get school pupils in a relaxed mood, and we should find new songs that we could sing with people starting schools and at work. Yeah? Who's next?
There's somebody in the 24 who wants to ask a question as well. We mustn't forget them.
Thank you. I can see the obvious connection with singers and breathing rates and heart rates. Presumably the same thing would work with wind instrumental players. I just wonder if you've looked at non-wind instrumental players or dancers dancing in groups. Do they have the same sort of coordination?
Not as clearly. With wind, you can have it if you play the same phrases, and we've done some experiments with that. But for me, when I play the piano, I often breathe quite irregularly. And maybe with phrases that you can see certain correlations, but you're not forced to breathe in the same way as you do when you sing. But there will certainly be some correlations.
Hannah, over there, there's... Okay, yes. Yeah. Yes.
Hello. I was just really leading on from what was being said about the physiological changes perhaps not being as apparent with professional singers instead of amateur singers. And you also mentioned that slow hymns were most effective. Does that then follow that polyphonic music, some of which we were singing, wouldn't be as effective? I don't know whether you've done studies on polyphonic music. And also, because I guess you'd be breathing at different times, depending on your voice parts. And I was also interested as well, I wonder how important it is that the participants are willing. In terms of there are plenty of people who probably the thought of singing fills them with so much dread. I just wonder how we can get around that, or how that can be done with people who the thought of singing is so stressful that maybe this would work against that. I don't know.
I just want to add to that. If you just take yourself back to the beginning of the day and what Vivian did with us, very carefully what she was doing was not saying, right, you're now going to sing. And for those of us who are afflicted with being English in the room, there's this terrible, crippling sort of embarrassment if you're not used to singing. And she just got us to speak. And gradually she changed the speech into something that was pitched. And speaking is very, very similar to, when I say speaking is very similar to singing. If I spoke on the same pitch, it would very quickly turn into singing. And so her way through to that, I think, is the answer. That with you taking a group that feels awkward about it, you just get them to speak, and you do exactly what Vivian did with us this morning, which was, now, for the rest of your question.
I agree totally, and also about the polyphonic music. I mean, if you sing like a canon, then this heart rate would be phase shifted. So I mean, when you're breathing, in the next phrase, it will be not aligned like here, but you could see the same phase, but starting with different timing. And then if you sing parts, it doesn't change very much, the synchronization, because we had these four here were singing first in unison and then in parts, and it didn't change the spectrum very much at all.
Hannah, there's a gentleman over here.
Thank
Yes, please, of course. Yes.
Hi. Again, to pick up on the point made over there, we're talking very much about breathing and heart rates, but there are lots of cultures around the world that use singing and rhythm to achieve altered mental states. How does that help us to understand what's going on? And have you done any work in that area at all?
Well, we haven't done that, but I saw a recent study by also Bernardi about toning, when you can just sing and improvise, and they saw that there was elevated heart rate variability, maybe not in sync like this because they were singing at different times, but and that worked very well. But I haven't myself worked with this kind of altered consciousness, as you say. There are other people who, I think they put some Austrian shamans into a brain scanner and looked at that, but I'm not sure what came out of it. But I'll come back to that.
I think it is interesting what our experience of singing is in an English culture, and how it does vary around the world according to different cultural settings. I mean, at one time I sang with a singing group in Canterbury that sang world music, and we had an excellent musician who led us in a wide variety of African songs. We just went on and on and on and on and on and on. So we might be singing for 10 minutes, quarter of an hour, repetitively, often with movement. And I can't really explain what happens, but something very different happens from singing the kind of piece that the 24 sang, or singing in the way we sang with Vivian. So maybe it's just that we move into a different mental state, but then that's just describing it. I don't really understand why that's happening. But I think we might, all of us, be really quite surprised at what we might experience if we opened ourselves up to 5 hours of chanting. I mean, has anybody had any experience of 5 hours of chanting? Yes. I mean, what do you think is going on?
I don't know. I can only sort of recount.
Yes.
It was with the San Bushmen in the Caprivi Strip, and they had a healing ceremony.
Right.
And whilst I wasn't chanting myself, there was a semicircle of female singers who were singing two very closely intertwined, highly repetitive sequences of notes. And that went on for about 2 or 3 hours, and the people who were to be healed went into a trance.
Yes.
And as an observer, I could feel my mental state altering. I was becoming slightly elevated.
Yes.
It's difficult to describe, but
Yes.
I wasn't myself at
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I think it's a very, very important point, because when you look at the existing literature on singing and what effect it has on us, the range of the repertoire or the character of singing that has been studied is actually really quite narrow. And sometimes research looks at what effect does it have if people sing together for 5 minutes or half an hour, or maybe an extended choral piece that might last for an hour. But to look at what happens under those circumstances, I'm not aware of any research that's been done on that. So I think there is a considerable scope for a much wider range of work on this. Yeah. There's a lady over here. Yeah. How long do you want? You're going to just...
Do we know if people who sing regularly in choirs and have done for many years have a lower incidence of heart attacks than people who don't sing in choirs?
That's such a good question.
I'm hoping.
Rickard, yes. Rickard, I think it's a very, very good question, because the work that I've done recently has been working with older people who have developed serious problems with their health. So does it help people under those circumstances to live rather more effectively and better with a long-term health condition? But I think the real challenge is to ask whether preventatively regular engagement in this kind of activity and lots of other activities. I mean, there's nothing necessarily very special about singing. You could be dancing all your life, or you could be painting all your life, or writing poetry all your life. And all of these things, I'm absolutely sure, will add to people's quality of life and help them cope with the challenges of life that people are going to face. But I think that, going back to the point that Rickard made, that when the paper was published, I was very envious because it generated such a lot of interest, and there was considerable coverage in the media all over. And journalists were very quick to say, oh, here's something that people can do that is good for health and might help to prevent heart disease. Now, you didn't claim this at all, did you? And the study certainly doesn't show that. But I think that in principle, if people are engaged in something which, after all, is about regularly relaxing and taking time for oneself and expressing oneself and socializing with others, it's going to be a good thing, isn't it? But we would need very extended, expensive studies over many years to be able to show that in that particular way, singing regularly has a preventive health benefit. So I think the answer is we don't know, but it might.
No, we can't prove it, but I think we don't think the opposite either. I mean, but I know of a study with twins, and they looked at dementia, and if one of the twins had been engaged in music a lot during their life, they had less risk of getting dementia, and because all the genes were the same, of course. This was with one egg twins. So that's interesting.
Any other questions? Over here.
Thanks. It's a question to the room, I think, then, because this is something I remember in the all-party the working group. I'm sure it says something, quotes some study in there about involvement in, it wasn't singing, I know it wasn't singing, but it was a social group, arts-based, which had a similar effect to giving up smoking. Now we know from, obviously, when the smoking ban came in, what the immediate 2-week effect was, so it's not necessarily as long-term as your question. But I think, I can't remember the details of the study, but does that ring bells for anybody else in the room? That there are powerful, if it's equivalent to giving up smoking, then it's, better, it improves on the effect of giving up smoking. I mean, wow.
Yes.
But does anybody have any, do you remember the
I can't recall what that is.
No, but I'm sure
of course,
there's a little nugget in there, quite early on in the report.
I mean, it is, if people are part of a singing group and they're meeting regularly with other people, there's an element of commitment, and there's an element that people are making an effort to do something regularly and get out of the house and meeting people and so on. So irrespective of what people are doing, that's bound to be beneficial. It's always bound to be good for us to be active and engaged as opposed to inactive and isolated. I mean, that's it in a nutshell, in a way, at its most basic. But then there might be very specific things over and above that we get from dancing or from singing or from painting or from creative writing. But I think the getting out and being engaged, I don't think that can be underestimated, how important that is in relation to our well-being and our health. Okay, I think we've got time for just 2 more quick comments because Rickard is going to end the morning by playing to us before we have lunch.
Hi, I just wonder if there's any mileage in the treatment of not treatment, but would your techniques be useful with white coat syndrome and things like that?
With
pressure management?
Which syndrome?
White coat syndrome.
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Blood pressure that rises for no reason, no organic reason. You go to the GP and you get your blood pressure taken and it skyrockets high. You started on treatment, and it's not actually a problem, it's more of a psychology. I
Yes,
wonder whether music
yes.
would be useful,
I'm sure.
musical
I'm sure.
techniques would be
Yes.
useful in that.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that syndrome, so but I guess try singing and see what happens. This is my recommendation, but there's no proof for it yet.
I think if you asked everyone to sing at the same time as going to the doctors, that would push it even.
Yeah.
I think we've got time for one more question, Hannah. Yeah, over here.
I had a relative who developed Alzheimer's, and during his last 7 or 8 years of life, grew less and less linked with reality, so much so that he cautioned the waitress for not putting enough peas on his plate in a restaurant, and stopped the car and asked someone someone he didn't know just to get in the car, which is quite scary, and things like that. But even right to the end of his life, when he couldn't read a book, he'd been an English teacher, but he'd sung in parish choirs all his life, sang bass, but he could still sing hymns, Christmas carols from memory, and not only could he do that, but when he had one of his aggressive phases, if we started singing, because we all sang in the family, it would sort of calm him down,
Yes.
and he would enjoy singing and bring him back to a sort of relative period of normality
Yes.
just after singing. And it was the last thing to go.
Yes,
So,
yes,
yeah.
yes. Thank you very much for that. Okay, well, we're moving up to the lunch break, but Rickard is going to perform something for us to finish the morning.